Matt started his web video career at Driver Digital, moved to Frederator, but I only met him after he launched his Little Monsters consulting firm. In 2017, we retained him as an insurance policy to ensure we weren't doing anything boneheaded on YouTube, and indeed, thankfully, we weren't. Matt takes the time to analyze YouTube, and while he's not necessarily going to be right about everything, I consider him YouTube's anthropologist because he's definitely leading the charge to study how humans are conducting themselves on the platform. So Matt, you and I think first met when you were at Driver Digital, is that correct?
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Remember you. And then you went to Frederator, and so you were a publisher, a producer. Now you're wearing another hat, which is kind of, how do you define yourself, first of all, in your current role?
We consider ourselves a YouTube agency. So we help brands build audiences on YouTube. We do that through a combination of consulting, production, and paid media spends.
Interesting. Okay, YouTube agency. But ultimately, you are trying to make sense of not just the algorithm, I would say, but just like the whole taxonomy and like method to the madness of discovery and recovery of content on YouTube. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say I'm fascinated by audiences and algorithms, right? Where every day I get to go into work and basically say, how does this audience work? What do they want? What does the data tell me about what they want? And then how does this algorithm work? And what is it telling me about what it wants from the content? And how do I marry those two things together to get kind of maximum view efficiency for any piece of content or for a YouTube channel or for a brand?
Okay, so take me through when you were at Frederator, which was part of Next New Networks, which ultimately YouTube acquired. Was it basically you guys started to experiment, and then you had some success, and then you, looking back, said, this is the playbook, this is how you have success on YouTube? Or on the contrary, did you guys have an actual thesis and said, this is what we're going to do, and some of it was right, some of it was wrong? Is it basically like retroactive, or was this all planned out, so to speak?
Well, the success that we had at Frederator with Cartoon Hangover was, probably well above and beyond our expectations, in no small part because we were riding the coattails of a creator named Penn Ward, who had created Adventure Time and had also created Bravest Warriors, but that had never been picked up. And so when we put out Bravest Warriors on Cartoon Hangover, we were able to grab onto those Adventure Time coattails, kind of at peak Adventure Time, and really do unbelievably well for Cartoon Hangover in terms of what we were able to achieve from a viewership perspective and from a fan, engagement and fan love kind of perspective. In terms of what we did from the network side, we grew a network of about 3,000 channels, all in animation or animation-related content, and our value proposition to creators was, hey, look what we did with Cartoon Hangover. We can help you do the same. And when we were small, we were able to change people's lives just by meeting with them sometimes, because this was 5-6 years ago, and there was just so little knowledge share about like what makes YouTube tick that we were able to help creators very quickly. But as we grew and grew and grew, we ran into the same problem that most MCNs did, which is why most MCNs still don't exist, which is essentially we weren't able to continue to provide that same level of hand-holding to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 creators by the time I left. What we found was when we promoted them from Cartoon Hangover, they would do, millions of views, right? Now, the problem was that, there were millions of people watching Cartoon Hangover that did enjoy those cartoons. There was, 8x that didn't enjoy those cartoons. They were there for Bravest Warriors and Bee and Puppy Cat. And so what we decided to do was to take Channel Frederator, the YouTube channel, Channel Frederator, and build it into a place where we could promote our creators, build that expectation in the audience from the beginning, and drive viewership to those creators. And we were able to drive about 100 million views over about 2 years to the creators in our network. And so from a network perspective, I think we were able to achieve the part of the goal of the building of the network. And then from just building Channel Frederator, we were the goal was just to get it as big as possible. And the month I left was our highest viewership month ever. I think it was May 2016.
It was downhill after that.
They've struggled from time to time, but no, I love the team at Frederator. Love Fred. Really, cherish my time there. Was a fantastic mentor and boss. So yeah, I think we set out goals and went to achieve them. The bigger goal during my time at Frederator, and one of the reasons why I went there, was to move beyond animation, and we definitely fell short of that. But part of that exercise was to establish ourselves as the go-to place for all things online video programming, which is audience development, basically. And the part of that strategy was to write these research papers and put them out on sites like TubeFilter and present them at conferences like VidCon. And that led to me being able to have Little Monsters. So while we didn't achieve that goal at Channel Frederator, I do hope that we're achieving that every day at Little Monster.
Did you leave before or after the acquisition by YouTube?
So I actually wasn't at Next New Networks.
Okay.
When Next New Networks was bought, Fred took Channel Frederator and Frederator out of Next New Networks, and I came about a year after that.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So one of the knocks against what ultimately, fair enough you weren't in Next New, but what Next New did is they developed these style guides, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This playbook, this roadmap, blueprint of like how to basically crack the code. Do you think that in the end that led to almost a homogenization of content on YouTube, where every thumbnail looked the same, the font was all yellow, and there were certain kind of things? Do you feel like that's a fair knock, or do you think it's an unfair?
No, I don't think it is a fair knock, mainly because as someone who has written many of those. Now, I didn't write the Next Networks one. That was Vanessa Pappas, who's now at TikTok, Ryan Nugent, who's now at Gunpowder and Sky, and Andres Palmater, probably amongst many others, who's now at Facebook, right? So like brilliant people that now have amazing jobs and are doing amazing things. But in terms of like the reach of those, like the ones that I've written and put out there publicly, like maybe have been read by 1 million people, right, in aggregate, like 1 million unique people. There's 20 million at the very least, 100 million at probably the highest end, YouTube creators putting out content, right? And most of those things haven't also been translated into any sort of language. What the homogenization, the similarities between content on YouTube, I think, is primarily driven by creators seeing other creators being successful and then trying to ape that, right? And so like, yeah, yellow text and thumbnails, right? And we did an investigation of why yellow and that kind of stuff. Like, I think they just see, oh, well, this person does it, so let me do it. And I think, a big part of that, or what we're seeing now, and probably what we've seen kind of evolve over the last 3 years, is that it goes in waves, right? When everything starts getting similar, right? They start kind of chipping away at each other, and people that are different start coming up, right? And so like, one of the things you reference is something that I want to do a documentary on, which is like stupid YouTube face, right? Which is in the thumbnails. It's like, oh, I'm so shocked, that kind of thing, right? I want to, meet with psychologists. I want to meet with behavioral scientists and people that study like emotions and that kind of thing, and find out like why is that face so addictive and clicking. But the reason I bring that up is because like if you look at gaming, right? Like huge gamers don't even put their faces in the thumbnails oftentimes, right? It's just like, the logo of the game and maybe some stuff from the game. And so like you see verticalization of trends and those same like little waves within those trends. So no, I don't think so. I think it's more just natural, in the same way that like if you see a baseball team doing really successful, you say, well, what are they doing to make them successful? What can I take from that and use for myself to be successful?
Speaking of baseball and Moneyball, how much of the stuff you put out is really based on research, data, looking back? And how much of it do you think is more like applying common sense and proposing like basically hypothesis of then which some of it you get right, some of it you get wrong?
I would like to say everything is data-backed and data-driven, but some of it is certainly not. Anything that's like a data report or a research report, that's going to be data-backed and data-driven, and you're only good as your data analysis, right? So you can look at the data and say, wow, videos with a whole bunch of comments get a whole bunch of views. Let's just try to get comments. And it's like, No, comments aren't driving the views. Comments are a byproduct of the view, right? And it's the understanding of what is correlation and without causation, and then correlation with causation. And that's based on a tremendous amount of research, reading papers that are, put out by Google that are way above my pay grade. But on the other hand, I'll put out something like the taxonomy of YouTube videos, right? And that's completely subjective. But I put it out there as a resource for people that want to make content on YouTube, but don't really know a way to think about it. They don't have a structure for it, right? There's the writer's journey for YouTube, and that's kind of what I was hoping that kind of became. I am a fan of systems, right? And so for me to be creative, I need a system in which to be creative, or else I'll just, spin my wheels and go crazy. And so, the taxonomy is far more observational, but it's meant to be a springboard for bigger conversations. It's the starting point of the theory on YouTube content, not like the end product. And I don't think there ever will be an end product. I think it'll evolve, it'll change, or at least I hope it will.
What does YouTube say to you about the stuff you put out?
Well, I think a lot of people at YouTube are big fans of the taxonomy, right? Because what the taxonomy does is break down what is typically a very complicated and difficult process where, people who are creatives hold the magic keys to the kingdom, and you go, give me a great idea, creative person, where that's something that they can show to people that says, look, here's what's popular on YouTube by and large. If you make some sort of unique combination out of this, your content can do really well too, right? And so I think stuff like that, there's probably much more fans of than some of my other work, the work on the algorithm. I think it's a mixed bag on the algorithm. I think there are people at YouTube that really like that sort of stuff because that's stuff that they can show, the people that they work with. It allows for people to know a little bit more and dispel some of the myths around the algorithm. And I think there are people that absolutely hate it and don't appreciate it. I think they probably disliked reverse engineering part 1 the most. Part 2, actually, that was the very first time I saw a Google research paper out in the wild, and I wrote a paper on it and then presented on it. And the people, some of the people that wrote it actually were in attendance at the Vidcon presentation that I did of it. But in that same Vidcon, which I think was 2017, was the first time YouTube had spoken about the algorithm in 6 years, right? And I spoke to some people involved in that afterwards, and they said the only reason we got to do this was because you put out that paper. Not the original research paper, but my notes on the paper and what it meant for publishers. And what they meant by that wasn't so much thank you for exposing something. It was, what your work has done is helped us show the importance of us having a side in that conversation, which I very much welcome. I'd rather hear it straight from them, what's actually happening, than me having to look at data and a crystal ball and be like, well, it's some of this and some of that and that kind of stuff. I'd much rather get information from the mothership. And so, I think in some ways they really like it, and then in some ways they don't, right? They don't want people to abuse the system. But if you're building a system to prevent abuse of that system, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's no, it's on you to prevent the abuse, but it's also on you that you've sold these 20 to 100 million people on your platform in a place where they should invest their time and their energy and their business and build their businesses on your platform. It's on you to tell them how to be successful on that platform.
Okay, a lot of great points. Briefly, because then I want to get on bigger issues, but briefly, do you think that YouTube is sitting there navigating, pulling levers, and therefore really understanding the power they hold with this algorithm? Or do you think that they've kind of created this Pandora's box, that is out totally that they always have to kind of pull back in and rein in and be like, oh my God, we didn't know this would be the result of what we've created and unleashed on humanity?
More the latter than the former. So essentially it's built atop neural networks, right? Neural networks are black boxes where even if they wanted to, they couldn't understand what's happening there because it creates essentially a language that only it can understand. So in that capacity, essentially they give it a goal, right? And then it runs, trillions of tests to achieve those goals. So no, I don't think there are people necessarily like pulling levers and deciding who wins or who loses on YouTube. But I do think they, from time to time, give it various policy direction and various goals that are much more in alignment with their goals and their advertisers' goals, as opposed to like a creator's goal in that regard. And I think it's what they have built is the most advanced system in the world for recommendations, right? Like, I think we're like, oh, it's YouTube, and it's like, yeah, it's the most brilliant shit anyone has ever come up with in so many ways. It's the largest library of information by magnitudes in the history of the world. And so in that capacity, like the more I learn about it, the more like, awesome in the traditional sense of the word I think it is. It's awe-inspiring what they have done in so many ways. That said, there have been some updates recently that they put out white papers about. One is a DPP optimizer, and essentially what that means is in the browse feed, at the very least, what Praveen suggested, they are separating out the recommendations they make that are too similar in topic, right? And they say that results in a better feed, and they call it diversity, but it's just diversity based on your watch history and giving those same recommendations. It actually has nothing to do with like a diverse set of opinions, which kind of hints to the last point in your question about what they have unleashed on the world. And YouTube catches a lot of flack, and people say you're responsible for radicalizing people and this kind of thing, and it's like, I don't think so. I think it's more that they have exposed inherent flaws and weaknesses in human beings through those recommendations. Like, YouTube didn't set out to make a bunch of, Steven Crowders, right? It's a byproduct of, I think, human nature, because I think the algorithm in a lot of ways just feeds that back.
Howard Stern became king of radio. He was a shock jock. Donald Trump, agree or disagree with him, is president. Like, that's a reflection of human beings and our own biases, like you said. It's like a tool, right? Does YouTube really have a responsibility to the community, like the creators, the WatchMojos who built businesses? Or is it like, look, like you get what you sign up for. Nobody's putting a gun to my head and building a business on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts? You talk about this responsibility and whatnot. Do they really have a responsibility, or is it just it's a for-profit business and,
Yeah, well, I've made both of those arguments when the argument has suited me to, respond to whoever, right? It's like YouTube owes you absolutely nothing, right? You got what you signed up for. And then on the other hand, I will absolutely 100% tell YouTube that they do have a responsibility, in no small part because they're also dealing with very impressionable humans, right? You're talking about, the largest audience in the world for, people 13 and below. And so I think there's a lot of responsibility there. And I think just inherently, if we're looking at the crudest capitalist sense of the word, then no, right? But I don't believe in that. I don't believe that's a fair system. I don't think that's a fair system that human beings should tolerate. And so in that capacity, yeah, absolutely, I think YouTube has a responsibility. Now, where that line is, I think it's a huge gray area, and I think it'll be something that will forever be debated. But yeah, I've actually been unbelievably impressed with how Susan has managed the transition from kind of the YouTube engineering culture of like, no, go f yourself for a private platform, to being much more open and communicative with the people that are operating on the platform. I think she's done a good job. I think she's got a very long way to go, and the platform has a very long way to go still, but I think we should absolutely applaud the strides and efforts that they've made, for sure.
So do you think that ultimately YouTube is responsible for the content that is uploaded on the site? And that includes pedophilia, hate speech, all of that whole salad of bad stuff.
I don't think it's a clear yes or no answer. I think they bear some responsibility to, at the very least, be trying to prevent that, and I think they are. Or not prevent that, but limit its exposure and have some sort of mechanism or mechanisms in place to, at the very least, combat like just straight false information. So yeah, I think there is some responsibility there. I think there's also responsibility on, parents and teachers. I think there's an even bigger responsibility on our government, which, like, I know is ridiculous, but at least in America, to assume that your government will do anything to actually help its citizens, to pass legislation that does protect consumers and its citizens and operates in its best interests. And where that line is, I'm not sure, because we haven't had that debate. Right? We haven't had that debate at length and known the data and seen their sides and advertiser sides and people who have deep understanding of human nature, their side, and hearing it in a public forum to know what is the best path and how much responsibility is on them. But it all reverts back to the citizens. Where are the citizens holding these people accountable? There's not enough of us that take it seriously and understand the impacts that not just YouTube generally, but all these social platforms and artificial intelligence has and what that means, right? We're bickering over whether or not to give kids in jail toothbrushes, that came here seeking asylum. Like, you hit some hot button issues for me on the Trump and that sort of thing. But the one thing that drives me absolutely insane is the cries of like censorship and the First Amendment. That's where I think the argument of you don't have to put your content here really falls into place, right? And if YouTube said, you know what, we're just going to be all kid friendly, all that sort of stuff. Everyone else, you're gone. That's their choice. I mean, they're not going to make that choice, but
So a year ago, I was looking at our stats and I was like, hey, revenue's down. And I thought it was seasonality. And it just so happened that they update that quarterly. And in Q2, so April, we were off Google Preferred, which is a steep drop of monetization. Now, I kind of reached out and I just said, something's off. Is it seasonality? And they're like, no, we should have not done so without giving you a heads up. But you were knocked off because you have too many sexy actresses and violent scenes. And so I realized I had created a monster, meaning first with fair use, I had created and empowered my team to do whatever that they wanted. And then two, I kind of had given the keys to the fans and the community through the suggest tool and my team to do videos that people wanted. But I kind of just walked in and I said, look guys, so we're 50, 60 people producing content. How do we feel if I draw a line in the sand and half of us don't stay with the company? And I was like, because we're off Google Preferred. So if we really want to be like, screw the system, we're going to do whatever we want, well, we're going to make half the revenue. It was a business decision. It was an adult conversation to have with my team. So I totally agree.
Do you guys want to keep talking about sexy actresses or you want jobs? We're like, we'll take the jobs.
Yeah. So it was simple. I gave the power to the people. But, so I never cried censorship, and I agree with you 100%. And again, it's not really, the word is not censorship, but where I feel Google fails in its mission to organize the information and make it readily available is they also objected to our World War II videos. All of a sudden, the rise of Hitler and the Holocaust and all these things, they said, well, that triggers certain keywords that make this brand unsafe. So we said, look, these videos will live elsewhere on our site and other places. But that's the only time when I kind of said, you know what, Ash, you didn't sign up for this. Like, this is where I had to do something for the greater good to keep my employees employed. But that's where I just felt like YouTube was now kind of the word, whether it's selling out or whatnot. But it's because it's a machine. It's a big, dumb machine that's actually very intelligent. And, if Adolf Hitler is brand unsafe and we erase him from the history books, I don't know if society is better off. And I don't know if Google is meeting its lofty vision. So that's where I find difficulty in reconciling. I would never cry censorship, right? Yeah. So I guess my question to you is, how can Google and YouTube meet their vision given that backdrop?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it comes in at policy, and probably we've seen the greatest policy swings in the last 2 years because of pretty seismic issues that have rocked YouTube in a lot of different ways. And
such as
Coca-Cola ads appearing on ISIS recruitment videos, such as pedophiles time-stamping videos that feature little kids, and then there was there's another big issue that kind of with Steven Crowder and the harassment of
Carlos.
Yeah, exactly. So I think with all these things, we expect instantaneous results, right, from these mega companies, and to absolutely make the right decision. I think it's more complex than that, and they can't necessarily just make the right decision immediately because the right decision isn't necessarily clear. It's a combination of a tremendous amount of things, and it takes a little time to learn. And it's like, well, sometimes there's a very clear right and wrong, right? Like the Carlos incident, it's like, come on, guys, right? Like, that's a pretty easy one.
I agree, but I always see both sides. I knew when they first, even though everybody says they garbled their response, when I read it, when they said we're considering other options, I knew they were going to demonetize, but let him be on the platform. Because I don't think anybody at YouTube is happy to defend Crowder's point of view and language. I just think that they go, it's such a slippery slope that once we say this is not satire or it's not comedy and it's hate speech, where is that line? You know what I mean? So I kind of felt like they had no choice, because then all of a sudden everybody's going to go and say, well, I don't like what this person is saying, and then all of a sudden criticism. And I'm not at all defending Crowder's rhetoric, but I understand why YouTube just felt like this would be a middle ground. And in the end, it was ineffective on all fronts because,
Yeah, my point was more about like the harassment was a clear violation of the policies as written, I thought. Right. I think, yes, you can have a very lawyerly interpretation of the policy, right, and defend. I'm not saying you're defending, but generally the concept of keeping them on the platform, that kind of thing. But I think in that specific instance, it was relatively clear. But I think you're right. I think that is the argument that they make. But to the point you made about the World War II stuff and the Hitler stuff, right? Like, you can't tell me that just speaking about history is brand unsafe, given the fact that there is a history channel on TV that makes millions of dollars. Like, give me a break, right? But it's one of those things where it's like there's not necessarily an easy machine-driven solution to this problem, right? And for a company that was built by engineers, that's where they want to go first, right? And humans aren't like that. Machines are, but humans aren't, right? And so that's where you see this friction, and I think there's always going to be friction, and I think there'll always be a debate, and there'll always be a pursuit of perfection, but they're never going to get it right all the time out of the gate.
Do you think that these companies, these platforms, Google, Facebook, you alluded to government intervention, but we've all seen the videos of the politicians not having a clue how any of this works. So how do you reconcile that? Like, what should the government do? Should the government, like YouTube being not part of Google is an easy way to split those assets up. Facebook is a bit trickier. You could argue, well, where do you draw the line? But
just shut the whole thing down.
No, okay, so I want to know, what are your thoughts on the government's involvement?
Sure.
And should these companies be broken up?
I don't think I have a specific, well, this is absolutely what the government should do kind of thing. I think it's a combination of a lot of factors, as we were kind of discussing a little bit earlier. I think kind of first and foremost, the responsibility is on the citizens to elect people that more represent the citizenry, like AOC, like Rashida, that kind of thing. Because the number one thing we can do to get more people who actually understand how the internet works is elect those people into Congress and into the Senate, speaking as a U.S. citizen. Because if we're going to have a government by the people and for the people, and we're electing our own representatives, maybe we should stop electing racist, white, 65-year-olds. There's a start.
Or just less of them to start off.
Right? So I think that's a big part of it, right? Like, I don't really think it's our responsibility to teach, Mitch McConnell, how the internet works. Like, get him out of there. I think that's the first spot. I don't think they're going to do a good job of it at a first swing, in no small part because they can't do a good job at anything at the first swing, right? Like, everyone's got to satisfy somebody. And it usually is the citizens last, in the same way that on YouTube it's the creators last. Like, Creators definitely are the reason there's an audience there and drive tremendous value for YouTube.
But do you really, like, just playing devil's advocate, I always felt that like YouTube, people say like YouTube's all about the creators or YouTube's all about gaming. I'm like, no, to you, YouTube is about that. You know, I was always like turning to YouTube to listen to music, right? So it was really practical and convenient for me. There was all this collection of music, live, bootlegs, and everything. But I just feel the reason why the creators were cast as, and they are the soul of YouTube, is because it wasn't like SpongeBob was going to be trotted out on at Brandcast because Viacom was suing YouTube. It's not like Taylor Swift was going to come out on stage and talk about how much she loved YouTube because she was like, pay me more than the rate. So I feel like the creators and the creator community, a subset of which then being the LGBT community, that like turned to YouTube as a place where they could open up and kind of like get some, like sanity because they were probably being abused or intimidated at school, so to speak. I just feel like creators were just conveniently like, hey, look, we're all about the community, but YouTube, was really built on, I feel, music and gaming, if you want my honest opinion.
Yeah, but I mean, even in music and gaming, they're creators, right? Like, I'm thinking more from a priority level, right? Like YouTube's first priority is YouTube, right? Business, great. Second priority, I think we could argue whether it's audience or advertisers.
Advertisers, I think. Because the only time YouTube does something quickly is when, line one, the CMO of Procter & Gamble. You're going to see change.
That's fair.
Si se puede. But if it's not the CMO of a big marketer, it's like, well, these are big issues and policies that we need to...
That's fair. That's fair. From an algorithm standpoint, at the very least, it's audience.
Yes.
I wasn't speaking about audience, that's corporate. So that's the audience, and like if we're talking about like a YouTube decision-making algorithm, right? Those are like, weighted at like 99, 98, 97, and then creators are like getting a 33, right? 25, right? Like,
you're generous.
Yeah. Right? And part of the issue is that like they've done such a great job, and so many people want to be there and to have that life or do that thing that if you're upset as a creator, guess what? There's a million people behind you that want your spot, that want your views. So what do I care, right?
Is that healthy? I mean, I know you could just say it is what it is. That kids now grow up want to be YouTubers.
Is that healthy? Well,
like it's ultimately a vein. I mean, I wouldn't call it healthy. Like my wife and I started the business. We have an 11 and a 9-year-old. We don't really push them to be YouTubers. We want them to have normal childhoods, So, but we live now in a world where, if like statistically, kids say, "I want to grow up and be a star online." So, do you see that sustainable, or do you feel like we're going to be paying the price? It's like, oh, what happens when you elect a reality TV star as your president? There's like payback. You're hung over for a while, right? So do you think that this is
really
healthy?
It's a new black hole of all conversation? Like that guy. Well, I mean, 20, 30 years ago, almost every kid wanted to be a policeman or a fireman or a teacher, right? It's just what's in their face at the time, what they're into and they're interested in. Like, how many 25-year-olds are spending all day on YouTube? Not that many, right? Not in comparison to 13-year-olds, right? And so, like, I think some of the controversy there might be a little overwhelmed. But I would also say, like, if by YouTuber you mean they want to be the next David Dobrik and just run around screaming and jumping and doing whatever, then yeah, that's real unhealthy. Like, we've already got one, we don't need any more. But there are YouTubers who are doctors, right? There are YouTubers who are lawyers and YouTubers who do amazing DIY and home and garden and speak to interests way beyond kind of what your standard YouTuber is. And so, like, I wouldn't want to paint it with a giant brush other than to say, like, yeah, don't be, that.
YouTube, did it become this dominant thing progressively in your opinion, or was there one or a few watershed moments?
I think the biggest watershed moment was when Google bought them, right? Like, there was 20 platforms or something that all had relatively equal audience. Maybe YouTube was a little bit ahead of everyone. But when Google bought them, it changed the game forever, in no small part because of the partner monetization system. When Google came on, they had all the infrastructure that you need from an actual sustainability standpoint for video that no one else could match, right? And then from a global sales team standpoint, you're going to compete against Infinite? Fuck you, right? Like, so I mean, that was kind of the biggest moment. But that doesn't happen if they don't invest tremendous amounts of time and energy in bringing audiences to the platform and back to the platform, which, by having creators being able to monetize just, like that, right? They've empowered all the creators to send everyone there, right? And then from keeping them their standpoint, what they've done from a suggestion place, the next kind of big moment that put them out in front of like any potential competitor other than maybe Amazon, maybe Facebook, although Facebook, took a shot at the king and missed, in my view, is when they switch to watch time, right? Because what's more valuable than people's time is universal, right? There's no other universal equal between all humans other than time, right? And so by optimizing around time and making that switch, right, and doing that years ago, and everything that they've learned and built since then to further that along, they've got a 6-year head start with the smartest people in the world to occupy your time, right? You just can't catch up to that without investing, 5, 6x what they've invested, right, which is billions and billions of dollars. So I think, from that standpoint, the two big moments is the Google purchase and the switch to watch time.
Fascinating. So with what's happening in the EU around copyright, Article 17 and all that, do you think, is Google and YouTube, are they going to figure that out and the platform stays more or less as is? Or do you see that as like an existential threat where, yeah, maybe, YouTube is going to be forced to really change what they allow to upload in the EU? And the same way that they applied the EU's position against hate speech, where they said globally, if you do hate speech, we're going to take you down, that then they're going to scale back the kind of content that could be uploaded on YouTube.
To be perfectly honest, I haven't paid close enough attention to it. Generally speaking, though, I think money talks pretty much everywhere in the Western world, and I think there's too much money at stake for anything significantly bad to happen. And then in Europe, people take who rules them far more seriously, although our friends over in England seem to have forgotten that for the time being, at least. Boris, are you fucking kidding me? Have you learned nothing? Anyway, so I'm not too worried about it. It's something that's so wildly out of my control and something that I can do something about. That is, my focus is just probably 98% on the U.S. and Canadian markets and publishers. That's where all of our kind of company clients come from. So it's just one of those things where it's it'll be what it'll be. Smarter heads will prevail.
Who do you think is, I wouldn't say a threat to YouTube, but who is really the number two? Is it Amazon? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? Is it TikTok? Netflix is still a bit different in my world, but who do you think is really the number two in that race long term?
At the moment, I don't think one exists. I think it might be something in the realm of IGTV. It seems like Facebook Watch really isn't going anywhere fast. And Facebook has a whole host of its own bigger problems and issues. I think the thing that YouTube has that none of these places other than TikTok has, and I'll circle back to them in a minute, is that YouTube as a platform was always founded as a place for video, right? Instagram wasn't, Facebook wasn't, right? Snap wasn't, right? Now they play in video, Twitter definitely wasn't. Now they play in video, they have video tools and that kind of stuff, but it's not the primary purpose for why people are there. People are on YouTube for video and that's it. Now as it pertains to TikTok, I think they're gonna run into the same problem with Vine, which is watch time on platform. Right? It's really hard to get long sessions when every 6 to 15 seconds you're presented with another teenager screaming at you or lip syncing. How long are you going to spend doing that? Yeah, okay, it's 20, 30 minutes of fun, but you're not going to sit there for 150 minutes like the average mobile user does on YouTube scrolling through TikTok. I don't even know if there's that much content on TikTok to spend 150 minutes there. I say extremely sarcastically. So no, I don't think TikTok's any sort of real competitive threat currently in their current form. Now, can they make changes? Can they make adjustments? Sure, but then you're just making YouTube light and you're going to suffer from the same exact problems any other competitor would, which is billions and billions of dollars of investment and time from the smartest people in the world as it pertains to video and audiences.
What's one thing you got wrong that you're comfortable in sharing? And you said, this is what's happening or this is why. so-and-so happens, but in the end you're like, nope, that wasn't the case?
From like a big perspective, I try to avoid making any sort of like future predictions. I would say from a business perspective, like starting my agency, I like to say I read a Forbes or Harvard Business Review top 10 lists all small businesses make and use it as a checklist. So all of those, not the least of which was getting too big too fast. We started the company in August of 2016. In January of 2017, I had 9 employees, and by August of 2017, I had 2. Right. So that's probably the biggest mistake that I made. Now, we came out the other end much stronger. We're back up to 6, very healthy. I can pay all of them for a long period of time. So I'm very happy about that. But that was kind of the big one that I made. From a industry perspective, probably I would say the biggest one was the assumption that MCNs would figure it out and stick around. I think Studio 71 is the only real big dog left in the U.S. BBTV up in your neck of the woods. Very fond of the team there. I think they're doing really interesting things. And I think what we're seeing is the MCNs that did heavily invest in things other than taking 10% from as many creators as they can have come out the other side doing okay. Or at least are still kicking and fighting the good fight. So, I didn't pick up on the Maker acquisition as a moment of time in which the bubble officially burst, but that acquisition, the bubble burst, once those papers were signed. And, that was not something that I had necessarily predicted or foreseen in a certain way, even having worked for MCNs for 6 years.
Final question. Do you think in the future, I know you said no prediction, so I'm going to ask you one. Do you think that YouTube is going to be more Disney, Jimmy Kimmel, the traditional media guys who are going to have just so much resource and catch up? Or is it actually going to be the traditional YouTubers and brands also like the WatchMojos and the Smosh and the Rooster Teeth, like digital natives? Or do you think it's going to be traditional, it's going to just take over, they're too big?
I think it's going to be, the safest answer I could possibly say, but what I also think it'll be is it's going to be a mixture of both. It always will be, right? There's going to be certain audiences that don't get what they want from, the traditionals and the majors and go to YouTube for that. And those are your YouTubers that they're connecting with, right? You're a kid living in the Midwest somewhere, and you don't fit in with the 20 other kids that happen to be within driving distance, right? You turn to some place to find that connection, and that's what YouTube has done. We're big city guys, so we're used to there's 10 million people within a 15-mile radius. I can pick and choose who I want to spend time with. Most people in the world don't have that luxury, or so. That way, I think original YouTubers will always, have a place and have a connection and have an audience. That said, I think what we're seeing more and more is that big media companies and traditional media companies are big and powerful because they've made amazing things that people love to watch and spend their time with. And if they win that battle of attention one way or another, then they've got massive resources. Like an independent creator, entertaining someone for an hour a week, right? That would be amazing, right? People would be blown away by the creator's ability to do that, right? If you do that at a major media company, you're fired, right? It's no, you're entertaining people 24 hours a day around the clock, right? It's a massive, massive amount of content. And so creators, you're going to run into the same problem that anyone that wanted to compete with YouTube would run into. It's, one of my favorite moments from Game of Thrones, because let's be honest, the last season sucked, right? But one of my favorite moments in the series is when the riders go into the wave of zombies and they get there and it's just a wall, right? That's what you're running into. I've just equated YouTube to a wall of zombies. Why not? But that's what you're running into in terms of forces against you, both as an independent creator or as a company trying to challenge YouTube.
Fascinating. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.